Hey, welcome, discipleship groups. I'm going to dive into Psalm 55, one of the more complicated Psalms that we've looked at up to this point. And the reason why it's complicated, it's something called an imprecatory Psalm, which is basically a Psalm that is focused and emphasizes calling out to God's judgment and wrath, which is something that you might read and be like, what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to respond? I want to talk about imprecatory Psalms for a minute, and then we'll jump into some specifics with Psalm 55. But imprecatory Psalms, again, are this call for judgment. They're a call for punishment, and they're provoked ultimately by the horror of sin and injustice. And so, like David here is, he is provoked to horror by the betrayal of a close friend that is leading not only this person into sin, but those around them in the city to sin. And so David is like, hey, this is outside of my control. I need you, Lord, to intervene because this sin is distracting and leading away from the plans and purposes that you have, God. Not only that, but David is a representative of God here for the Israelite people. And so David is viewing this as, hey, like this is a personal attack, but it's also an attack on the plans of God. You know, for those that are believers, we are temples of the living God. We have the Holy Spirit in us. We are God's representatives. And so many times when sin and injustice takes place, we personally take response. And I think what David models for believers is, hey, that's not an attack necessarily on us, it's an attack on the person that we represent. And so maybe instead of us responding in negative light, we should take it to the one who actually has control over things. And so it's this humility of saying, God, this is bigger than me. I don't understand. I recognize this isn't necessarily personal, but this is an attack on you. And so I'm going to go to the one that can offer judgment and do that way. So what do we do with these Psalms? What do we do? I think in moments of crisis, in moments of sin, in moments of large corporates, and imprecatory Psalms are incredibly helpful. I think recent history with us, earlier this year we had a war outbreak in Ukraine that's still going on. And there's a lot of injustice going on in that war. And I think an imprecatory Psalm is appropriate to pray because we don't have a clear response. We don't even have clear action steps of how we can help. But an imprecatory Psalm is saying, hey God, we see injustice, we see evil, we're calling on you to be the one that brings judgment. Another thing that I think of is a hot button subject, but in the past several years, like all the racial upheaval that we've seen in our country, and regardless of where you stand on this issue, there's clear evil in regards to how we view others of the opposite race. And we quickly forget that every person is made in the image of God. And so as we watch injustice happen in our society, and we still do to this day, we can call for God's judgment in the face of sin that we're not really sure what to do. So I think many of us can say, clearly something is wrong, I don't know what to do. An imprecatory Psalm is appropriate to pray there because it's saying, hey God, this is out of my control. I see this injustice. I see this large corporate sin. I'm calling on you in humility saying, I can't fix this, I need you. So in Psalm 55, we see David being attacked personally by a friend. He opens up in the first 8 verses simply saying, God, I need your help. And I think that many of us should take that posture as we enter into life circumstances of, God, I need your help. This is more than just a request. David is seeking the Lord. And not only that, we see in verse 9 and 11, him begin saying, hey, there is someone speaking out. Lord, I ask that you would confound and confuse their speech. Fun little comparison. What is the response in the Tower of Babel? The judgment is that the Lord would confuse and confound their speech and spread them all out. And so David is petitioning the same response to here. He's asking, hey, Lord, confound these people's speech that are speaking wrongly against me and ultimately against you. I think that's just a little fun, little interesting thing. And then also we see in 9 and 11, we see this concept of this is happening within the walls of the city. The corruption the danger is happening within. And the irony is, walls are meant to protect from the outside, not from what is within. And the corruption, the deception is causing strife and hurt within the city. And David is calling that the Lord will bring judgment against that. And then we begin to see, hey, this is a faithful friend that has hurt him. We see in 12 and 14, this is someone that he would worship with. This is someone that he would count as a close friend who is speaking either against him incongruently in a lot of different ways. This person was a peer and a companion and a good friend who he had close fellowship and entered into the temple with. This is incredibly painful for David. And again, he had no control over this. And so in verse 15 through 19, he calls a really hard thing. He says, let them be brought to death. Yikes. And we see again parallels to an Old Testament example of this where Moses in I want to say Numbers 16 calls for this as two people rebelled against Moses. And so again, as God's representative, David is calling for really harsh things because this person is standing against the promises and things of God. And David is declaring here in verses 15 through 19, he's just saying, Lord, would we be completely separated from these sins? And so as you continue to go through, you see this reminder of what this person is doing. We see more explanation. And then as we close, we see David ultimately landing, hey, Lord, I've asked for your judgment. I've asked you for you to intervene, and you are my refuge, and I'm going to rest in you. And so in Psalm 55, we see how to respond in the midst of betrayal. We see this. We see just the significance of our words, and we should count the cost of our words. We see instead of fighting back, we see we should rest in God to bring resolution and to restore, and that ultimately He is our refuge, even when those closest to us might betray. And so Psalm 55 is interesting, it's complex, it's fun, it's a little weird, and you might have been wondering, what do I do with this? I hope this video has helped with that, and I will see you again soon.